Hello everyone, welcome back to the Literacy Volunteers of Harrison County YouTube channel. We're a nonprofit United Way agency. Today we're going to look at the second lesson in Biology 101. This is lesson 2 on the cell, right? So what is a biological cell? Cells, I told you the last time, are the basic units of life. According to the cell theory, everything is composed of cells, and they are categorized according to how their genetic material is packaged. So let's look at two terms that will seem a little foreign to you. If you've had biology before, you might recognize them. But we look at two separate forms of biological cells as either being eukaryotes or prokaryotes. When we break these words down, kary actually means corn or kernel, but it's referring to the nucleus of the cell. Okay, so we have to look at the prefix. Eu means with. So eukaryotes have a defined nucleus, and we're going to look at this here in a minute. And pro means before, right? The prologue to a book comes at the beginning, before the actual book starts, right? So this is before the nucleus. So they do not have a well-defined nucleus. And we break all cells down into, are they prokaryotic or are they eukaryotic cells? And so let's look at the differences and similarities, more differences than anything in the two. I've put this on a chart. Here's our prokaryotic cells here on the left, and our eukaryotic cells here on the right. Let's look at the prokaryotes first. I've told you pro means before the nucleus, so they do not have a well-defined nucleus. These are all single-celled organisms. If we have genetic material that isn't well-defined, it has to be on a small scale. So these are single-celled organisms. The genetic material is suspended freely within the cell. This is my representation of a bacterium, so I'm not an artist, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about. In prokaryotic cells, our hereditary material can be DNA or RNA. And we'll look at RNA a little bit later on when we look at heredity. But we're just looking at here, are we coding for genetics, or we're looking at coding for proteins, and we'll talk about that. And they reproduce by what's called binary fission. That's an asexual form of reproduction. A means without. And so these are without having sex. That's how they reproduce. Eukaryotic cells have a well-defined nucleus. There are two different types, plant cells and animal cells, and they're a little bit different, and we'll look at that here in a minute, but mostly the same. They have a plasma membrane, and that's responsible for monitoring the transportation of nutrients, electrolytes, even ions, water, back and forth across the cell, right? And it's also responsible for cell-to-cell communication. On the outside of all your cells, you have cell markers, which make you. That's why when you go to have a transplant, say you had a liver transplant, and they give you a transplant from somewhere else, they have to give you anti-rejection drugs, because your body sees that liver and says, we don't recognize those cells. And so they give you those drugs to keep your body from rejecting it. So it's very important when we look at these cells, because we have to say, how do they communicate with each other? And they reproduce both sexually and asexually, right? So we'll look at that later on as well. Here's our cell structure. I've drawn for you here a representation of a plant cell on the left and an animal cell on the right. Let's look at the plant cell first. Plant cells have what's called a cell wall. So they do have a cell membrane, or a plasma membrane you might hear it called. But on the outside of that, they have a solid, rigid structure made of cellulose and pectin, right? Those two things provide the rigidity that helps to protect the cell membrane. And it also provides shape to the cells. So when you see a stem or you see a leaf cell, they have a certain shape because of the cell walls that surround their cell membranes. And we'll look later on about photosynthesis and how, like when you see a plant shrivel and shrink, we've lost the water here, and this shrinks and is no longer pushing on the cell wall, so it shrivels. So that's one difference between a plant cell and an animal cell is the cell wall. The second one is the presence of chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are only found in plant cells because they photosynthesize, right? We don't find chloroplasts in an animal cell because you don't photosynthesize. You have to take in nutrients. You can't make your own. So here's an animal cell, and what I've done is broken down the cell membrane, sort of like you would zoom in on it. The cell membrane supports and protects the cell here, and it controls movement into and out of the cell. That's where we get that selective permeability of the cell. So let certain things in, let certain things back out, because it's made of these little tiny things called phospholipids, right? These phospholipids have these little tails on them that are what are called hydrophobic, right? Hydro means water, phobic means fear of. They face the middle, and they have hydrophobic tails and hydrophilic, water-loving. Hydro means water, philios means love, right? Philadelphia is a city of brotherly love for a reason. And we've got these two heads that face out. We have these transmembrane proteins that allow things. We also have proteins that might be on one side or the other. Okay, so those are, and it's very fluid. If you take biology class, they refer to this as the fluid mosaic model of a cell membrane. Cytoplasm. Cyto means cell, and the plasm is the material inside. It's thick, it's clear, it's kind of like jelly, right? It's a viscous substance. And most our chemical reactions will take place here, and our organelles are located within the cytoplasm. The nucleus contains the hereditary information. That's where your DNA is, and it's found in the form of chromosomes, and we can talk about chromosomes in another lesson. It sends signals to grow, mature, divide, and die. All of those signals come from the nucleus. It's kind of like the command center of the cell. It's surrounded by a nuclear envelope, and that separates the DNA from the rest of the cell. We don't find DNA floating around in the cytoplasm of a eukaryotic cell like we would a prokaryotic cell. So what I've done here is to label the organelles, and I'm going to tell you the descriptions of those. So maybe I will slide this over a little bit, if we can move just a little for this one piece, and we'll put this here, and I will move to the other side. And we can look at the organelles. So there's your picture, here's your descriptions. If we look at A, that's the nucleolus. It's a tiny little body that's located within the nuclear envelope, in the nucleus, and we get ribosomes synthesized there. It also will control cellular reproduction and will control cellular activities. The membrane that surrounds us is that nuclear envelope, right? Then we have C. If you notice, if you look at the picture over here, it's continuous with the nuclear envelope, and C moves back and forth like this. That's because it's called the endoplasmic, within the cytoplasm, reticulum. Reticulate means to move back and forth. So we've got the endoplasmic reticulum here. We have two types, smooth, without ribosomes, and rough with ribosomes. And the endoplasmic reticulum transports stuff through the cell, but the primary role, it metabolizes those carbohydrates and makes lipids, steroids, and proteins. That's where we get the ribosomes. Ribosomes are sites of protein synthesis. So on the rough ER is where we find those. We also have what are called the Golgi bodies, that's D. They look like little stacks of pancakes. And the Golgi bodies transport materials within the cell. I've just told you that E, the little dots on the endoplasmic reticulum, are ribosomes, and that's where protein is synthesized. F is the mitochondria. And we've talked about mitochondria a little bit when we looked at health and wellness, but that's the powerhouse of the cell. And you have, like, you put gas in your car, it makes it go. The power in the cell is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate is what it stands for. We just call it ATP. That's our cellular energy or cellular currency. And then G is a lysosome. Lys means to kill, like Lysol kills germs. And so that protects the cell, and what it does is it engulfs foreign bodies like a little Pac-Man and kills them and gets rid of them if we get foreign bodies in our cell. And then I put H and I down here. We don't have those represented, but H is the chloroplast, and I told you that's only found in plant cells because they photosynthesize. And an I is a vacuole, and a vacuole is just a big like balloon that stores water. Mostly water, some food, some waste materials, but mostly water. So let's look at the functions of the cell. There's just a couple of these. The major functions that are essential for growth and development of any organism. We need to provide support and structure. So I gave you a couple examples. Your skin provides support for your body, and it's made up of thousands of millions of cells, right? And then we also have something that's in vascular plants called xylem. You have things in plants that carry food and carry water and minerals, and it's made up cells that provide structural support as well. So support is a big function of a cell. Two, they facilitate growth, and the way they grow is called mitosis. And then they also aid in cellular respiration. So mitosis is nothing but cellular division. We start with the parent cell and we get 2 daughter cells, right? That's all mitosis is. We also have what's called meiosis, which looks a little bit the same, but it's different, and it forms gametes. Gametes are sex cells. So here's our representation of an egg, and there's our representation of a sperm, right? And they each have N number of chromosomes, which is haploid. We put them together and we get a full organism, which is diploid, because your mom gives you half of your genes and your dad gives you the other half, which make you, right? That's cellular basis. Transportation of substances. So we get nutrients that are imported to the cell that carry on various chemical reactions. We also get waste products that are eliminated via active and passive transport. And we can look at that, the difference between diffusion and facilitated diffusion, things like that. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, and ethanol diffuse across the cell membrane along a concentration gradient. What I've done for you is draw a simple concentration gradient. Molecules in biology always move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. If I were standing here and sprayed perfume from a bottle and you were way over there, eventually you would smell it. They're more concentrated here and it will diffuse into the air to you. Same thing happens in a cell. We may have a whole bunch of salt here and it's concentrated. It's going to flow down its concentration gradient to an area of less concentration. That always happens, except if what we want to do is move it back this way, we have to provide energy in the form of ATP to move against a concentration gradient. And the last thing is energy production. The 2 types of energy we look at is photosynthesis, right? Photosynthesis gives us glucose, and that's sugar, and that's energy that that plant needs, right? And we need it too. And cellular respiration is what you do. You break down the sugar to make energy for your body. So this is the first lesson on the cell, and the next lesson will be on energy, and we will look at that one the next time that we meet. But please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.